Good evening, everyone. My name is Shaker Krishnan, and I'm a Democrat running for City Council to represent our communities of Elmhurst and Jackson Heights. I'm a civil rights lawyer for low-income tenants in our city, fighting against eviction and harassment and housing discrimination, a longtime community activist, and a public school parent of two small children. And I'm so excited tonight to talk with you all about ranked choice voting in our city. I just want to take a step back and first say for a second, thank you all so much for joining tonight, for being so participatory in all our events too. This is, we've been having these discussions weekly on Thursday nights called the Shake It Up with Shaker series, where we're doing different topics of interest to our community and our city. Last week, we had a really moving discussion on culturally responsive education and our public schools, which was an excellent conversation. Before that, we've done fighting transphobia and repealing the walking while trans ban, to housing justice in our city, to building a community center in Jackson Heights, as well as establishing a tenant anti-harassment task force in Elmhurst. So each week, we want to feature different topics with leading activists, those involved in the work on the ground, who are impacted in different ways by it, or from our communities and across our city, who can talk to us about these issues, the most pressing issues and crises that we face right now, which in my opinion is really a crisis of racial justice, affordability, and public health, especially coming out of this pandemic. I'm so excited tonight. The topic of our conversation is on ranked choice voting. Voting, as we know, is a fundamental civil right, and it needs to be protected and expanded. The problem is that across our city and across our country, there are so many efforts being made to actually obstruct and undermine the right to vote. With the Supreme Court that's so hostile, that's tried to undo decades of work in our country to really ensure the right to vote is protected, to the courts in our New York State, in our New York City as well, that have also taken up challenges in different ways, ranked choice voting, allowing challenges and processes moving forward to undermine a process like ranked choice voting. So as we've seen in the Georgia elections and the presidential and around the country too, so many efforts to really block, in particular, communities of color from being able to vote, immigrant communities from being able to vote. That's why it's so important that we dedicate all our efforts to protecting our electoral process, not just in the laws, but in reality, and also when we go to the ballot box to vote. So many voters are simply disenfranchised because when they show up to vote themselves, they're not given correct information about where they're supposed to vote. They're asked to show ID, which they're not supposed to be asked, or information isn't given to them in a linguistically accessible way to make sure they can exercise their right to vote. Right here in New York City, this happens all the time in election after election. And if you take a look at our voting rights platform at our website, www.voteshaker.com, you can see all the proposals that, in talking with a lot of voting rights activists on the ground, that we're proposing to really ensure and protect the right to vote in our city and the voting electoral process itself. Now, one of the biggest changes in New York this time is ranked choice voting, which is really a way to ensure that voters in our city and in our communities have far greater say in the electoral democratic process, to make sure that candidates are reaching out to as many communities as possible, and that all those who are impacted by the everyday decisions in our city have a say itself in voting. Now, for me, it's fundamental that that right to vote is expanded to immigrant communities as well, regardless of immigration status. We've seen in COVID how much our immigrant workers were our frontline and essential workers, yet so many of them don't have a voice in our electoral process. It is urgent and critical that as a city, we expand our right to vote to all, regardless of immigrant status. Now, tonight, talking about ranked choice voting is a sea change in the way New York City does its elections. And it actually was the result of a charter, first the Charter Review Commission that proposed it, and then a citywide referendum in 2019 to make sure that it was approved by the voters of New York City. And it was approved overwhelmingly by 75% of voters in New York to establish ranked choice voting, or RCV, in our city. But now we've seen that as we're getting closer to implementing it, there are forces out there that want to stop it from happening, that have brought litigation in the courts, that are spending too many resources in challenging ranked choice voting. When in reality, those resources should be spent in making sure voters are aware of how ranked choice voting works and understand the process. I'm really proud to join a group citywide, a number of candidates that together in this week, the RCV Week of Action, are doing educational and awareness events to talk about ranked choice voting and how it works. But it only matters and is valuable to the extent that we're reaching all our communities in linguistically and culturally accessible ways. Which is why tonight I'm so excited that along with our presentation in English, we'll be having presentations in all different languages too. And I want to introduce our awesome group of panelists here who are joining me tonight in talking about ranked choice voting. We have Wei Lai Rice, who will be speaking to us in Mandarin tonight about RCV. We have Nusrat Hossain, who will be speaking to us too about RCV in Bangla. We have Paula Aguilaguien, who will be speaking to us in Spanish about RCV. And we have Deependra Lama, who'll be speaking to us in Nepali about ranked choice voting. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we'll go through these presentations one at a time. Each of us will do a quick explainer in each language on what ranked choice voting is. And then we're happy to take any questions along the way too. Just so you know, in the chat that we have as well, we'll be also posting links that will show to the organization Rank the Vote, which has really been promoting awareness and who we've joined with in this outreach, different resources in different languages. As we go through each language, we'll be putting the resources in the chat that you can check with a simple 2-page explainer of how ranked choice voting works. So with all that said, thank you so much for joining, and let's get started. As I mentioned before, RCV was established through a citywide referendum with an overwhelming number of voters voting in support of it. Now, as we establish it, we've got to think about exactly how it works. How it works is that it actually gives New Yorkers the chance to rank the candidates in any election, in citywide elections, in borough-wide elections, in city council elections. You can rank on your ballot up to 5 candidates in each race. Now, you should only be ranking 1 rank per each candidate. It doesn't help to rank the same candidate for 5 choices because they'll only be considered for the first choice they're ranked for. You do have the option to only pick 1 candidate and no one else, but you also have the option to rank 5 candidates in the race, which gives you the ability to express your preferences for different candidates. That's what happens on election day itself, or during early voting, or your absentee votes, or your affidavit ballots. Through all those different means, after election day, all those different ballots will be tallied to come up with the totals. Now, the way it works is after you rank your candidates or vote for which ones you want to, the selection process and the purpose, I should say, of allowing you to do that is to give you a say in and express your preference on each candidate. If you only chose 1 candidate, for example, you're only weighing in on 1 candidate in the race. But if you fill out your entire ballot for all the different candidates, you actually have a say in each part of the decision on each candidate and how you rank them. And that factors into the selection process at the end. Once the election is over and all the ballots are ready to be counted, the first check is to see if any candidates have made 50% plus 1 of the votes in the race. 50% plus 1. If they've cleared that hurdle, which means more than half the vote, there's no need for further rounds in ranked choice voting. The election ends there, the candidate is declared the winner. If no candidate has reached 50% plus 1 of the votes on the first round, you then go to a series of rounds where ranked choice voting comes in. And the way it works is all the candidates are ordered, and the candidate in the first round that got the least number of votes is eliminated, and you look at their second choice vote. And their second choice vote is then redistributed among the 4 other candidates. And you keep going through round after round like that. So you keep looking at the group of candidates, the one with the least number of votes in each round is eliminated. Their next choice vote is redistributed. You go to the next round, the same thing happens again, and you keep going until there are 2 candidates left in the race, and you see which one has gotten more than 50% of the vote. Now, one question that comes up is once you enter these rounds, if one candidate gets more than 50% of the vote on the 3rd round, let's say, does the election end there? And the answer is no. once you start the ranked choice voting rounds, it continues through this process until you get to 2 candidates left to see which one got 50% plus 1 of the vote. That's a simple explanation of how it works. I just want to say before turning it over to our next speaker that we have the resources in the chat here. A couple dates to remember in mind are early voting. So primary day itself is on June 22nd. The early voting period is June 12th to June 20th. And the last day to register to vote is May 28th. That's how ranked choice voting works. Thank you all for listening to my explanation of it. And I'll now turn it over to Paula to give us our explanation in Spanish.
Buenas noches a todas y todas y qué bueno que puedan acompañarnos. Creo que para la comunidad latina y todos los que hablamos español, la votación por orden de preferencia es realmente nueva, pues nunca, no existen unos sistemas similares en nuestros países, pero en realidad es un sistema muy fácil. La razón por la que en la ciudad de Nueva York este año vamos a comenzar a tener esta votación por orden preferencial es porque el año pasado en las elecciones nos hicieron un referendo y nos preguntaron que si queríamos y mayoritariamente dijimos que sí. Una de las razones por las cuales se está implementando este cambio es porque obliga a los candidatos a que le hablen a todos, todas y todos los votantes. A diferencia de cuando los candidatos solo se enfocan en un grupo específico de votantes, para ellos acá, en esta votación por orden de preferencia, es muy importante que les lleguen a todos. Adicionalmente, hace que la campaña sea un poquito más limpia. Pues ningún candidato quiere hacer un juego sucio contra el otro porque todos en el fondo, si no quieren tener la opción número 1, quieren asegurarse que es la opción número 2 del votante. Entonces, hace que las campañas sean muchísimo más amigables. La forma en que funciona la votación por orden de preferencia es muy simple. Tú vas a ver en el tarjetón o en la boleta de votación los nombres de todos los candidatos, hacia abajo, como normalmente lo hacemos, y lateralmente vamos a ver unos números, el 1, el 2, el 3, el 4 y hasta 5. Y tenemos la opción de marcar quién queremos que sea nuestro candidato número 1, nuestra primera opción. Y vamos a marcar en el círculo, como lo hemos hecho todas las veces, al frente del nombre del candidato que queremos. Y si no queremos votar por nadie más, no hay ningún problema, lo podemos dejar así. Pero si queremos que nuestro voto valga mucho más, pues tenemos la opción de clasificar quién sería nuestra segunda opción. ¿Cuántas veces hemos sentido que este candidato es mi favorito, pero si no fuera este, aunque sea, me gustaría que fuera este otro? Pues entonces la votación por el orden de preferencia nos da esa opción de que si por lo menos nos gana nuestro candidato que es el predilecto, el preferido, el que queremos, que cuando estamos clasificando el orden, existen más posibilidades de que gane otros que nos gustan, así no sea nuestro predilecto, y menos posibilidades de que quede el que definitivamente no nos gusta y no queremos. Entonces, por un voto, en realidad terminamos votando por varias personas, lo que hace que nuestro voto valga muchísimo más. La forma en que esto se va a contar es simple. Quiero repetir otra de las preguntas que anteriormente para que quede claro. Número 1, podemos votar solo por nuestro candidato de preferencia. Eso es muy importante que no se nos olvide. No tenemos que votar por todos. 2, podemos votar por varios si queremos, hasta 5. Eso es lo máximo. Puede que haya muchísimos más candidatos, pero solo puedes votar por 5. Y número 3, si votamos muchas veces por nuestro mismo candidato, no va a hacer ninguna diferencia. Va a ser el equivalente de contar un solo voto y el resto va a quedar como si contara en blanco. Esas son como algunas de las confusiones y de las preguntas que más salen, entonces quería asegurarme que quedaran eso claro. Ahora vamos a cómo viene el proceso de votación. Para que un candidato, de contar los votos, perdón, para que un candidato gane, ese candidato puede ganar de dos formas. Una, porque fue el número 1, la opción número 1 del 50 más el 1% de todos los votantes. Si un candidato tiene el 50 más el 1% más el 1 de todos los votos, ese candidato gana automáticamente y no pasa nada más. ¿Cómo funcionaría en una elección tradicional? Pero si un candidato no logra el 50% más 1 de todos los votos, entonces la forma en que funciona es que se van a contar los votos de todo el resto de los candidatos. y se van a ir eliminando por rondas los candidatos que tengan menos votos, hasta que llegue al final a que hayan solo 2 candidatos y que va a haber uno el que va a tener la mayoría de la votación y entonces ese es el que gana. Algunas de las preguntas que hacen comúnmente es qué pasa si cuando vamos eliminando candidatos hay un candidato que logra más del 50%, en ese momento gana ese candidato automáticamente y la respuesta es no. Solo una vez un candidato, una vez se comienza a contar por rondas, se tiene que terminar de contar por rondas hasta que llegues a 2 candidatos. Pero solo para que un candidato gane automáticamente tiene que ganar desde el principio, antes de abrir la votación de rondas, el 50% más 1 de todos los votos. Este sistema de votación se va a implementar para las elecciones de alcaldía, todas las elecciones de la ciudad, alcaldía, consejo municipal, para elegir al presidente del distrito y algunas elecciones especiales que están pasando este año. Es la primera vez que se va a usar en Nueva York, pero este sistema ya se ha usado en otras partes de Estados Unidos y ha sido muy exitoso en tratar de asegurarse que haya mayor participación y que todos los votos y todas las opciones de todos nosotros seamos escuchados. En el chat puedes encontrar unos links con mayor información en español sobre cómo acceder a la votación por orden de preferencia. Pero lo más importante que tienes que saber sobre esto es que puedes votar solo por un candidato si quieres, pero que al votar por más candidatos en el orden de tu preferencia, tu voto va a valer muchísimo más. Creo que eso es todo lo que necesitamos saber sobre el voto por orden de preferencia o RCB por sus siglas en inglés.
Gracias, Paula. That was excelente. Thank you, Paula. And a couple of points in that Paula mentioned I thought were worth highlighting too, and maybe I'll do that as we go through each speaker, was one, as Paula said, RCV or ranked choice voting is great because it gives your vote more value too, because you're being able to express your preferences and choices. And two, this has actually been a system very successfully implemented in many other parts of the country. So New York City is somewhat late to the game in this too, but it's actually worked so well and successfully in other places that it's great that we have it here. And with such, remember, resounding will of the people, with over 75% of the voters voting for it. Thank you, Paula. Now we'll go to Nusrat, who in Bangla will explain to us how ranked choice voting works and why it's so important.
All right, can everyone hear me? All right, okay. So সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ। আমরা আজকে রাত্রে বসছি ranked choice voting এর উপর কথা বলতে। So ranked choice voting হলো একটা নতুন পদ্ধতি যেটা এই বছর আসছে। So এইটা হলো আমরা সব ইলেকশনে ইউজ করব, মানে মেয়র ইলেকশন, বড় প্রেসিডেন্ট, সিটি কাউন্সিল সব ইলেকশনে এই বছর আমরা হলো করব। So এটা অনেক মানুষের বিভ্রান্ত লাগে, কিন্তু এটা সত্যি সহজ সরল। So আপনারা হলো আপনার প্রিয় ক্যান্ডিডেটকে প্রথম ভোট দিবেন, তারপরে আরেকটা ক্যান্ডিডেট যদি আপনার পছন্দ করে দ্বিতীয়বার ওদেরকে ভোট দিবেন, আর এভাবে দিতে দিতে আপনার হলো 5টা মানুষের জন্য আপনার ভোট দিতে পারবেন। So আপনারা যদি ফ্লায়ার দেখেন, ওইখানে আপনাদের ব্যালট থাকবে, আপনারা দেখতে পারবেন সব ক্যান্ডিডেটের নাম থাকবে, আর ওটার পাশে হলো 1 2 3 4 5 থাকবে। So এটা আপনার অনেক খেয়াল করে ভোটটা দিতে হবে, কারণ একটা ক্যান্ডিডেটকে আপনি হলো সব ভোটটা দিতে পারবেন না। So এটা মানে আপনি হলো যখন একটা ক্যান্ডিডেটকে ভোট দিবেন, ওটা হলো একটা জায়গায় থাকবে, তারপর আরেকটা ক্যান্ডিডেটকে যখন ভোট দেন আরেকটা জায়গায় থাকবে। So এটা হলো অনেক গুরুত্বপূর্ণ, কারণ যদিও আপনার প্রিয় ক্যান্ডিডেট হলো জিতে না, আপনি হলো এখনো বক্তব্য থাকতে পারে। এটা মানে আপনার আরেকটা ক্যান্ডিডেট যে পছন্দ হয়, ওরা হলো আপনার অফিসে আসতে পারবে। Also এটা হলো ভোটটা হলো বিভক্ত হয় না। and অনেক সময় মানুষের হলো পরিচিত মানুষ থাকে যে ওদের সাথে বেশি কথা বলে, কিন্তু এইভাবে সব ক্যান্ডিডেট সবার সাথে কথা বলতে পারে। So প্রথমে সব ভোটগুলা ওরা হলো কাউন্ট করবে, মানে ওরা হলো early election, তারপরে absentee ballot সব ওরা হলো কাউন্ট করবে, আর ওরা দেখবে যদি কেউ হলো প্রথম ভোটটা 50%-এর একটা বেশি যদি পায় ওরা হলো ভোটটা জিতবে, কিন্তু যদি এটা হয় না আর একটা রাউন্ড হবে। সো রাউন্ডটা যেভাবে কাজ করে হলো যে হলো অনেক কম ভোট পেয়েছে ওদেরকে বাদ দিয়ে দিবে। এটা হইতে হইতে 2টা ক্যান্ডিডেট আর বাকি থাকবে। যে ক্যান্ডিডেট এটার বাকি থাকে যে বেশি ভোট পায় ওরা হলো ইলেকশনটা জিতবে। সো অনেক মানুষ বলে you know second round or third round-এ যদি কেউ 50-এর বেশি পায় ওরা কি তখন ইলেকশনটা জিতে? এটা হলো হবে না। যখন এই রাউন্ডটা শুরু হয় আমাদের রাউন্ড হইতে থাকবে and হইতে হইতে শুধু 2টা ক্যান্ডিডেট থাকবে, তারপরে আমরা হলো দেখবো কে জিততে পারে। সো এটা হলো আমাদের কয়েকটা ডেট থাকবে যে আপনারা হলো মাথায় রাখবেন। সো মেয়ের হলো 28 তারিখ হলো হবে ফাইনাল ডে রেজিস্টার করতে, ভোট করতে। আর তারপরে জুনের 12 তারিখ থেকে 20 তারিখ পর্যন্ত আর্লি ভোটিং হবে। আর জুনের 22 তারিখ হলো ইলেকশনের দিন। সো আপনারা সবাই যায় ভোট করবেন।
Thank you so much, Nusrat. That was so great. Thank you for the explanation. And just a couple things I want to mention. I'll do it between each speaker too, so we can just clarify things too. So one of the things that I know that we put the links in the chat, just so everyone knows, the 2-page simple explainer is actually not for our council district. It's for I think it was CD 24, a special election. But that's the only materials right now that Rank the Vote has as far as the explainer goes. So disregard the candidates, obviously disregard the dates. I think the dates are like in February or January. That's because that's when that special election was happening. The dates that we've given you are the right ones in terms of the early voting. Again, it's in the chat too, but the last day to register being May 28th. The last day to request your absentee ballot is June 15th. The last day to request absentee ballot by mail, is June 15th. Last day to request absentee ballot in person is June 21st. And last day to postmark or deliver your absentee ballot is June 22nd. And the early voting period is June 12th to the 20th. The primary election day is June 22nd. So just to keep that in mind, if people want to if they have questions, you can drop them in the chat. We'll try to answer them along the way as we go through each speaker. So I just see one here from Ken that was earlier on, was how does ranked choice voting affect how minor parties get on the ballots in the future, such as Working Families Party in past election days? That's an excellent question. And we did some research into it too, but we believe that ranked choice voting is not going to affect minor party validity, because minor party validity is actually based on the general election results. So as long as a certain number of people vote in the general on the WFP line, they will continue to exist as a party. So it should not interfere with the system of the parties are on the ballot. Obviously, WFP being a big one too that we just had a resounding victory for here in New York. But because it's based on the general election results, it should be fine when it comes to minor parties as well. So that was one question we saw. Now we'll move on. Thank you, Nusrat. We'll move on to Weilai, who will explain to us in Mandarin how ranked choice voting works.
Hi, everyone. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay. 大家好。所以优先排序投票是指选民按照自己喜欢的顺序，对最多5名候选人来排序。你可以给5名候选人分别标记为第1、第2、第3、第4和第5选择。当然，你也可以像以往一样只选择一个候选人。在计票的时候，如果没有任何候选人在选民的第一选择中获得超过50%的票数，那么第一选择得票最少的这个候选人就会被淘汰，然后并将他得到的这些投票转移到选票上排第2位的候选人身上。我们会一直重复这个流程，直到有一个候选人得到了50%以上的选票，那么该候选人就当选了。所以有2点要注意的是，在您投票的时候，给同一个候选人多个排序选择的话，只有最靠前的那个排序会被计算。另外就是不要给多个候选人同一个排序，这样会导致您的选票作废。那么优先排序投票有很多好处，我挑几个主要的点说一下。第一是选民的选择会更多，您的选票会有更多的权利。即使您最喜爱的那个候选人没有当选，您的选票仍然可以帮助决定谁能当选。 第二是确保候选人能够以多数的支持当选，而不是只得到20%的票，他就可以成为这个当选的候选人。第三是可以减少负面的竞选活动。第四呢是消除单独2轮竞选，也就是 runoff election 这种需要，因为你这样可以节约时间和经费。第五就是优先排序投票呢，是可以提高候选人的多元化。有研究表明，在有优先排序投票的城市会有更多的女性和有色人种参与竞选和赢得职务。有几个要注意的今年的关于初选的日期，重要的日期是今年2021年纽约市的初选的投票注册截止日期是5月28日，然后提前投票是6月12日到6月20日，然后选举日是6月22日。谢谢。Thank you.
Thank you so much, Weilai. I think before we move on to our next speaker, just wanted to make 2 more points too about ranked choice voting. One is, a big benefit of it compared to elections in the past, that it actually is that it encourages positivity in campaigning, because now, as opposed to before, as we all know, politics can be very toxic, very negative and oppositional. But RCV is actually supposed to take away from that by encouraging candidates to be more positive with each other and see the race in a much more positive light too. So beyond every other benefit in terms of, most importantly, voter access and voters having a greater say in the electoral process, a hugely important point is that it actually encourages candidates to think differently about campaigning and approach it in a much more positive way, which is frankly far more necessary in our politics. The other point too, just going back to Ken's question about WFP and other minor parties as well, we did confirm too that in New York State, to qualify for automatic ballot access, if you're a minor party, a party must have qualified every 2 years by receiving the greater 130,000 votes or 2% of the votes in the previous governor's race or the presidential election. So because we're looking at either the governor's race or the presidential, the way that it's set up, the requirements too, ranked choice voting will not interfere with the ability of minor parties or parties like WFP to have access on the ballot. Now we'll turn it over to Dipendra Lama to talk to us in Nepali about how ranked choice voting works.
Hi everyone, you can hear me, right?
Yep.
All right, hello, सबैजना नमस्ते, म दिपेन्द्र लामा, नेपाली भाषामा आज चाहिँ र्याङ्क चोइस भोटिङको बारेमा हामी भन्न गइरहेका छौँ। सर्वप्रथम सबैजनालाई यो आजको कार्यक्रममा स्वागत गर्न चाहन्छु। विशेष गरी आजको यो सेसन चाहिँ र्याङ्क चोइस भोटिङको विषयमा हो। यो हाम्रो आउँदै गरेको स्थानीय निर्वाचनमा नयाँ परिवर्तन, भोटिङको विषयमा परिवर्तन भएको विषयमा यहाँलाई जानकारी गराउनको निमित्त राखिएको हुँदा त्यो विषयमा थोरै जानकारी दिनको लागि म नेपाली भाषामा उल्था गर्नको निमित्त यहाँनिर आएको छु। यो र्याङ्क चोइस भोटिङ चाहिँ 2021 जनवरी 1 देखि लागू हुने गरी यो चाहिँ सिटी काउन्सिल, बोर्ड अफ प्रेसिडेन्ट, पब्लिक एडभोकेट, कन्ट्रोलर र त्यसै गरी मेयर अफिस, मेयरको लागि चाहिँ र्याङ्क चोइस भोटिङ हुने गर्छ। र्याङ्क चोइस भन्नाले श्रेणीबद्ध रूपमा तपाईहरुले भोट गर्न सक्नुहुनेछ। यो चाहिँ 5 वटा श्रेणीमा रहेको छ, श्रेणी 1, श्रेणी 2, श्रेणी 3, श्रेणी 4 र श्रेणी 5 गरेर। तपाईलाई एकदमै मनपर्ने व्यक्तिलाई श्रेणी 1 मा राख्न सक्नुहुनेछ। त्यसैगरी यो चाहिँ दोस्रो, तेस्रो, चौथो गरेर तपाईलाई मनपर्ने मान्छेलाई श्रेणी 1 मा राख्ने र त्यसपछि दोस्रोमा राख्ने गरेर तपाईहरुले त्यसलाई गर्न सक्नुहुनेछ। यो चाहिँ जति धेरै विकल्प उति धेरै शक्ति भन्ने यसको उद्देश्य हो। त्यसो भएको कारणले गर्दाखेरि विकल्प राख्नुको कारण चाहिँ यदि तपाईले चुनेको मान्छे आएन भने तपाईको दोस्रो विकल्प चाहिँ तपाईको नेतृत्वमा आउन सक्छ भन्ने हिसाबले यसलाई ल्याएको हो। र यो पहिलो श्रेणीमा चाहिँ नि 50 + 1 51% मत ल्यायो भने चाहिँ उ स्वत उम्मेदवार जित भएको घोषणा हुनेछ र त्यहीँनिर मतगणना रोकिनेछ। यदि 50 + 1% चाहिँ आएन भने फेरि दोस्रो राउन्डमा चाहिँ गएर त्यसरी भोट गनिनेछ। त्यो गन्ने क्रममा जो चाहिँ 50% भन्दा बेसी मत ल्याउँछ उसले नै जित्ने गरेको हुन्छ। सो त्यसैले यो र्याङ्क चोइस भोटिङ चाहिँ एकदमै इम्पोर्टेन्ट छ, महत्त्वपूर्ण छ र यसले चाहिँ सहज पनि बनाइदिएको छ। तपाईको श्रेणी पहिलो श्रेणीको उम्मेदवार भएन भने दोस्रो श्रेणी अथवा तपाईले चाहेको उम्मेदवारलाई तपाईले र्याङ्क अनुसार चाहिँ भोट गर्न सक्नुहुनेछ। यो चाहिँ 5 वटा र्याङ्क हुन्छ। तपाईले 5वटा ऱ्याङ्कमा 5वटा ऱ्याङ्क पनि गर्न सक्नुहुन्छ र तपाईँले इच्छाएको ऱ्याङ्कको व्यक्तिलाई मात्र पनि भोट हाल्न सक्नुहुनेछ। यदि पहिलो ऱ्याङ्कमै तपाईँलाई मन परेको व्यक्तिलाई चाहिँ 5वटै पहिलो श्रेणीमा हाल्नुभयो भने चाहिँ त्यो काउन्ट हुँदैन। त्यसो हुँदाले एकजना व्यक्तिलाई एउटा पहिलो ऱ्याङ्क र 2जना व्यक्तिलाई दोस्रो ऱ्याङ्क गरेर तपाईँले 1-2 जना गरेर त्यसलाई ऱ्याङ्क भोटिङ गर्न सक्नुहुनेछ। र यिनै कुराहरू हुन् र ऱ्याङ्क चोइस भोटिङ चाहिँ एकदमै महत्त्वपूर्ण छ। तपाईले श्रेणीबद्ध रूपमा मतदान गर्न सक्नुहुनेछ। धन्यवाद। Thank you.
Thank you, Deependra. That was so well done too. And I just wanted to mention that this is an opportunity, as I said before, to really engage so many of our immigrant communities and multilingual communities too in participating in the electoral process as well. So what we'll also do too is thank you all for joining tonight too, but we'll also cut up our videos too in the different languages, and we can distribute them as well to make sure everyone is educated on how this process works. And so at a very, unless there are other questions that we see come up in the chat or in any other means, I'll just sum up for everyone for tonight's program. What are the main points on ranked choice voting? So of course, we know that the rationale for it is to make sure voters have a greater say, to encourage positivity in campaigning, to make sure the democratic process is actually far more inclusive than exclusive. And that frankly, we need to be spending resources in activities like these, educating voters, not suing the state and the state board of elections to stop, or the city board of elections, sorry, to stop this process. So we hope more will engage in this process of really educating our voters. That's the theory behind it. Bottom line, you can rank up to 5 choices on your ballot. Don't fill out the same one 5 times. Your vote only counts once for each candidate. Make sure you rank each candidate only once. You also could just rank one candidate and not fill out the rest, or you could fill out all 5. The goal is on the first try, if one candidate gets 50% plus 1 of the vote, the election is over. If they don't, you go through multiple rounds, reallocating the votes of the last candidate based on their next choice, until by process of elimination, you end up with 2 candidates left, and the winner is the one that gets 50% plus 1 of the vote with 2 candidates left. So it's either you go through at the top, you finish it off in 1 round, or you go through all the rounds till the end. But it's a great way to really engage everyone in the process. And I'm so thankful to Waylai, to Nusrat, to Paula, to Deependra for participating in this process as well too, because it's really, explainers like these that we can make clear in, the most direct ways how this process works. It's the first time it'll be done in New York City for our June 22nd primary, for the early voting before. And the other piece to say too is that in the June 22nd primary, the results will be announced round by round. So we as voters will be able to watch as the results come in from each round, if there are multiple rounds, how it works. But it'll be very exciting for New York City. It'll define the elections going forward, happening at every level. And it's just a great welcome change for New York that many of us have demanded. So again, check out the chat in terms of the links to different resources. Feel free to use those resources to distribute them too. We'll also be posting this recording and also splicing it up for different languages too. And you can check out our campaign website and platform at www.voteshaker.com, www.voteshaker.com, where you can find out all about our different platforms on each issue too. So I want to thank you all for attending tonight. Thank you all so much to our panelists too, who made this such a great event. And we'll see you next Thursday at 8 o'clock for the continuation of our weekly community discussion series, Shake It Up with Shaker. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Millie, for the shout out too in the chat. Vote Shaker 2021. Thank you all. I appreciate it, and see you all soon.